Hello, Petal. How you doing? How have you been for the last couple of days? Are you doing well? As ever, if you want to leave a little comment, let me know how you are. And if you could hit the notifications bell and hit a like if you enjoyed this video, then that would be absolutely awesome. Well, it's not only a video, it's a recording, but you know, it's still got a picture on it. It's kind of a moving picture. Well, not really. But if you could hit a like at the end, if you enjoy it, then that would be absolutely outstanding. I know there's 7 or 8 of you that do it every single time, and I'm very, very grateful, and I do appreciate it very, very much. But yeah, if you could like share, subscribe, hit notification bells and likes, because then the hamsters are happy. We're thinking about alpacas, maybe a couple of sloths, an otter here and there, sea otters specifically because they're more adaptable. Sorry, I've gone off on a tangent already, and we're not even 2 minutes in. We're not even 1 minute in. My goodness gracious me! So I'm excited. I'm getting my new microphone on Friday. Now I have got a selection of microphones, but the one I use for these recordings is actually a Yeti Blue. And I've had it for about 12 years. 12 years, I think? Is that an exaggeration? Maybe 10. But I've had it a very long time, and I thought now was the time to invest in a new one. So I've taken a punt. It was on offer. It was £40 cheaper than usual. So I thought, hey, go on then. I'll take a punt, and that's coming on Friday, and I'm really excited. I'm getting the Yeti Blue X, and it's got glowing lights and everything, so of course it makes it go faster. Right then, my lovely beans, let's get on with Paint Your Dragon, Chapter 4. Maybe, said a guest, they're being thrown out for antisocial behaviour. He was looking at a long, scruffy coach, state-of-the-art passenger transport from around the time Bobby Charlton was England's leading goal scorer, which was spluttering patiently in Bay 3A of the bus station in Hell. Quite possibly, replied a fellow guest, who happened to be on his tea break. Look what they're wearing. The first guest, also on his tea break, peered. Yeah, he said, I see what you mean. As a matter of fact, these 2 guests were always on their tea break. In life, they'd been builders, and the cruel and unusual punishment reserved for them in the afterlife was that they'd be allowed out as soon as they'd had a quick brew. 2,000 years of frantic slurp, and later, the meniscus on their cups was, if anything, 0.5 millimetre higher up the china than it had been when they arrived. Everybody, no matter how depraved or evil they may be, is entitled to a holiday, and the first 3 weeks in August are traditionally the time when the staff of Hell, your cosy, centrally heated home from home under the ground, get to pack their suitcases, dig out their plastic buckets and pitchforks from the cupboard under the stairs, put on silly hats and get away from it all. They choose August because, well, you know what the beach is like then. They feel more at home that way. If so, observed the second guest, I reckon we've had a lucky escape. His colleague nodded vigorously, his eyes fixed on the white denims, broad-brimmed hats, synthetic buckskin fringes, and spangled waistcoats of the party boarding the coach. Not, of course, that either of them had anything against country music as such. In its place, they'd be the first to declare it was all very fine and splendid. Except, of course, its place was most definitely here. So far the management hadn't twigged this. When they eventually did, they'd be able to maintain the same uniquely high standard of torment BS 199645, always look for the kite mark, while saving themselves a fortune on pitchforks and firewood. Had the guests been a few yards closer to Bay 3A, they'd have been able to read the poster prominently displayed in the coach's back window. It read, Hell Holdings plc, Staff Country and Western Club, Annual Outing, Nashville or Bust.
OK, George said. It's like this.
Just a minute, Bianca interrupted, switching on the pocket dictating machine. I want this on tape. George looked at her.
What's that little box thing you're playing around with? He said. Look, there's no need to get nasty.
Bianca explained, as briefly as she could, about tape recorders. Perhaps she didn't express herself very well, because George made a couple of high-pitched noises and renewed his pointless struggle with the stout ropes that attached him to Earth Mother 6, the most solid piece of statuary in Bianca's studio. Playing back the tape just seemed to make things worse. She sighed and slipped it back in her pocket. "You were saying," she said. "Once upon a time," George explained, "long ago and far away, in a remote land called Albion, there was a dragon.
In fact, there were a lot of dragons, and that wasn't a problem for the people who lived there, because they'd long since based their entire economy on dragons. They ate dragon, wore dragon skin, used the wing membrane to make their tents, and burned the bones for warmth. And since there were more than enough dragons to spare, great herds of them roamed the empty moors, grazing placidly, and from time to time accidentally setting fire to hundreds of thousands of acres. There was no reason why this system shouldn't work forever. That, however, was before the coming of the white men and the iron horse. Ancient Albion called them the white men because they wore white surcoats over their armour, and the horses weren't actually made of iron. They were just covered with the stuff to protect them from arrows. The newcomers were knights, followers of the code of chivalry, searchers for the Holy Grail. They'd been slung out of their own countries for being an insufferable nuisance and had headed west. When they had arrived in Albion, they decided it would do nicely, and they set about getting vacant possession. The natives, however, were no pushover, and the white men were getting nowhere fast when one of their leaders hit on a sensible, if drastic, course of action. The natives, he argued, live off the dragons. Get rid of the dragons, and you get rid of the natives. Of those wild, exciting frontier days, many stirring tales are told, many of them about the greatest dragon hunter of them all, me, Dragon George Cody, who single-handedly cleared all of what is now Northern England, Wales, and Scotland of dragons. He it was who first justified the clearances by saying that the knights stood for good and the dragons stood for evil, and, in my own terms, I was actually right. The knights were, after all, soldiers of the church, ultimately searching for the Grail, and the dragons were getting in the way, and by deviously getting killed and eaten by the locals, giving aid and comfort to the hostile tribesmen. Besides, George pointed out, dragons burn towns and demand princesses as ransom. Now, the dragons, referring to the siege of Jerusalem, the sack of Constantinople, and 1,000 years of dynastic marriages, said, "Look who's talking," but rarely twice. And then there was only one dragon left, the biggest and fiercest of them all, twice the size and 3 times the firepower of anything the knights had come up against. He had seen his race eradicated, the corpses of his kin heaped up beside the white men's newly built roads, and carted off to Camelot fried dragon bars, the length and breadth of Albion. He had also learned that he and his kind were the bad guys, which puzzled him quite a bit initially, but eventually came to make some sort of sense. After all, if dragons were the good guys, then these people wouldn't have gone to so much trouble to wipe them out, would they? "Well," said the dragon to himself, "if the cap fits," and so forth. In the event, wearing the cap was fun. "I see," Bianca said. "So that's why you weren't particularly keen to meet the dragon?" "Figures." "It had to be done,"
George growled defensively.
"Of that rough and ready cradle, a mighty nation sprang to life. Civilizations, like grapevines, grow best when mulched with blood. You can't make an omelette."
Bianca's brow furrowed. "You've made your point," she said, "but you haven't explained what you're doing in my statue, or," she added savagely, "why you keep moving the blasted thing about."
"I'm coming to that."
George paused and licked his lips.
"All this explaining," he went on, "isn't half making me thirsty. You wouldn't just give us a glass of water, would you?"
Bianca nodded silently, and went to the kitchen. As soon as her back was turned, George, who had been quietly fraying the ropes against an aesthetically necessary sharp edge on the statue's shin, gave a sharp tug. Of Sir Galahad, it is told that his strength was as the strength of 10 because his heart was pure. George's heart had approximately the same purity quotient as a pint of Thames water, but he did press-ups instead. The rope snapped. "Hey!" Bianca dropped the glass and came running, but George was already on his feet and heading for the door. When she tried to stop him, he nutted her with a plaster of Paris study for truth, inspiring the telecommunications industry, clattered down the stairs and legged it. "Finally," said the demon Chardonnay, ironic cheers and cries of "good." "Let's all remember, this is a holiday. We're supposed to be enjoying ourselves, okay?" At that moment, the coach rolled over a pothole, jolting it so forcefully that Chardonnay, who was standing up, nutted herself on the roof, thereby demonstrating to the fellow passengers that even in hell there is justice. "Pillock," muttered the demon Podsnap under his breath. What he had to come for anyway?" On his left, the demon Slitgrind grunted agreement. "I think management shouldn't be allowed on our inns," he said. "Ruins it for the rest of us. I mean, that chance we've got of having a good time with one of them miserable buggers breathing down our necks. If I'd known, I wouldn't have bothered coming." Although in his heart Podsnap reciprocated these sentiments, he was beginning to wish he hadn't raised the subject, because if one thing could be guaranteed to lay a big fat oil slick over the whole weekend, it would be having to listen to Slitgrin's opinions. Narrator's note: should I say Slitgrind or Slitgrind? It just sounds all wrong either way. I'm I digress. Slitgrind it is. "I mean to say," Slitgrind went on, "least they could do would be to have different coaches for management and us. Bloody cheapskates. Wouldn't be surprised if they'd done it deliberately just to spoil it." There are appropriately more opinions in hell than anywhere else in the cosmos, and most of them, sooner or later, belong to Slitgrind. Innumerable and diverse, contradictory even though they were, in the long run they eventually boiled down into a single multi-purpose one-size-fits-all opinion, namely that the universe was an upside-down pyramid of horse shit, with Slitgrind pinned down under the apex. "Oh well," replied Podsnap, trying to sound positive. It came as easily to him as smiling to a bomb, but he did his best. "Never mind. Still better than work, though, isn't it?" "Depends," Slitgrind said. "I mean, with friggin' management along, don't suppose it'll be any different from work. Wouldn't be at all surprised if—" "Oh, yes," muttered Podsnap's soul. "It'll be different from work, all right. At work I torture other people." "Oh, look," he said, pointing out of the window. "I can see a cow." "That's not a cow, you daft git. That's a bull-headed fiend goring impertinent usurers. That's another thing. They get uniform allowance, but we—" Podsnap closed his eyes. "Another difference," he noted. "The guests have all done something to deserve it. What did I ever do, for crying out loud?" At the front of the coach, Chardonnay, knees smothered in maps, tickets, bits of miscellaneous paper, and other props on loan from the travel agent's department, had dropped his red ballpoint. This was bad news. He was using the red pen to mark Emergency Itinerary B, second fallback option in the event of missing the Styx ferry and the 11:35 helicopter service to Limbo Central, on Contingency Map 2. Scrabbling for it under the seats, he found himself inadvertently brushing against the slender, hairy ankles of the demon Snorkfruit. Embarrassing. "Oh," he said, blushing bright grey. "Sorry." Not that there were many shapelier hooves in all the 9 circles. One-time Holiday Inn cocktail waitress, former centerfold in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, twice Playghoul of the Month in Hell and Efficiency magazine, Snorkfrod was just a sort of ghastly apparition any green-blooded demon would want to see jumping out of a coffin at his birthday party. It was just, well, whenever he saw her, the phrase "rough as guts" did inevitably spring to Chardonnay's mind, and, not that he'd had an infinity of experience in these matters, The way she stared at him sometimes was... "Hello," Snorkfrod replied, looking down and smiling like a crescent-shaped escalator. "Lost something?" "My red biro. Don't think you'll find it there, pet, but you're welcome to look." After a split second's thought, Chardonnay decided the safest course would be to say nothing at all and get the shop floor out of there as quickly as possible, which he did. Recovering his seat, as he sat down, he heard something go snap under his left hoof. No point even bothering to look, Chardonnay reflected, not for the first time, but maybe he wasn't really best suited in this line of work, or indeed this whole sector. It was, he knew, a viewpoint shared by many. The polite term, he understood, was upsiders. Talented high flyers head-hunted, so to speak, from outside at the time of the management buyout. New brooms, fresh pairs, or trios of eyes. As an experiment, it hadn't entirely worked. True, it had shaken things up. The bad old days of jobs for the fiends and living men's hooves were gone forever. And next year, there was a 1 in 3 chance they'd get the balance sheet to live up to its name for the first time ever. On the other hand, the inertia of any really huge corporation is so great that it takes more than a few college kids with stars in their eyes and Gucci designer horns to change anything that really matters. As far as he personally was concerned, well, he never thought he'd ever hear himself saying this. Maybe law school would have been a better bet after all. Nevertheless, here he was, and giving anything less than his best shot was unthinkable. The one area he knew he could improve matters was in industrial relations, which was why he was here. Either that, or he'd had a really wild time in a former life, and put it, as it were, on his access cord. Suddenly, he was uncomfortably aware that he was being looked at. Somewhere in the fourth row, something sniggered. Stray phrases like, "He's well in there," and "after hours in the stationery cupboard," were scurrying about in the thick atmosphere of the bus like mice in a derelict cheese warehouse. A huge, bald demon in row 5 caught his eye, winked and made a very peculiar gesture with 3 claws and an elbow. All in all, Chardonnay reckoned, he was rapidly inclining towards the past life theory, in which case he was bitterly unfair that he couldn't even remember what it was he'd got up to. By his calculations, it was 96 hours from hell to Nashville, and so far they'd been on the road for 20 minutes. And like he'd said, this was fun. Having sketched out a course of entertainment for the inventor of the concept of fun that would have seriously impressed his superiors, Chardonnay squirmed root-like into his seat, scrabbled himself a makeshift cocoon of papers, and settled down to enjoy his holiday. A flask of coffee, a ham and lettuce sandwich, a camera, the latest Ruth Rendell, a folding stool, a baseball bat, and thou. Thou, in this instance, being a big marble statue of a dragon. This time, Bianca had vowed, if the suckers move so much as a millimetre, I'll have him. It's just a question of staying awake and being patient. As for St. George, she reflected, as she scattered crumbs among the pigeons, best to suspend disbelief on full pay, at least until she saw what happened with the other statue. Once she'd had an opportunity to examine the evidence she'd gathered so far in the light of what she could learn from Mr. Scaly over there, she could make a fully informed, rational choice between the 2 alternative explanations. And if the vote eventually went the way of a big, peaceful house in the country and closed with the sleeves laced up the back, then at least she'd have the altruistic satisfaction of knowing that she, not the entire galaxy, had suddenly gone barking mad. She'd just got to the bit in her book where the second spanner turns up in the glove compartment of the original suspect's reliant Robin, when a tiny spasm of movement caught her eye, a tiny flick of the tail. She wasn't sure. So though her heart was pinging away like a sewing machine, and some funny bastard had apparently put gelatin in her breath, she stayed as still as rush hour traffic and waited. The next time, it was an eyelid, then a little twitch of a nostril. That settled it. The bastard thing was asleep. She stood up, packed up her things, folded the stool and gripped the baseball bat. It broke after the fourth blow, but it did not die in vain. Said the dragon.
What's the matter? What's the matter?
Wake up!
Is it that time already?
The dragon opened both eyes. He could see a young human female standing beside him, her head level with his eye, in her hand a broken club. Did she look somehow familiar? Probably not. Over the years he'd come across a fair number of similar specimens, but that was all a very long time ago now. And besides, the very circumstances under which he tended to meet princesses made it highly improbable that he'd ever met the same one twice. The same went for Amazons, viragos, heroines and lady knights. The aggressive expression and the fact she just hit him with some sort of weapon suggested that this one belonged to category 2. And in any event, it didn't really matter a toss. He breathed in and remembered that he was all out of lighter fuel. So that left jaws and claws, or else just ignore until she went away, like his mother has always told him to do if he was ever accosted by strange women. And yes, he realised this one certainly was strange. Bastard, she snapped. The dragon raised his eyebrows.
I beg your pardon,
he said. You're alive, aren't you?
Yes.
The dragon regarded the broken club, and then the female.
But don't be too hard on yourself,
he said.
You did your best, I'm sure.
That is not what I meant. You've been moving around, haven't you?
Oh, come on, urged his rational mind. Eat the silly mare and have done with it.
But he didn't. And not only for fear of rage and indigestion, he had an uncanny feeling that this particular human...
Mummy?
Get stuffed, the female replied furiously. And if you were thinking of making any remarks about chips off your block, don't.
Dr. Frankenstein, I presume?
Huh?
You must be the stonemason.
Sculptress.
Oh.
Difficult, by any criteria, to know what to say in these circumstances.
Good job you did on the tail.
The what?
My tail,
the dragon replied.
If anything, an improvement on the original. Now, if you'd been able to consult me beforehand, there's quite a few little design mods that you could have worked in, but for a solo effort, not bad at all. Not bad at all, thank you.
For some reason she could never account for, their simple thank you had a remarkable effect on Bianca. The best explanation she could ever come up with was that it was the first time one of her statues had ever thanked her, and it made a refreshing change. A good review is a good review. After all, although on reflection, it'd probably not be a good idea to quote it in the catalogue of her next exhibition. You're welcome, she heard herself saying, although that was undoubtedly mere conditional reflex.
Nice claws, too. You probably don't know this, but I used to have the most appalling rheumatism in the near side front. Much better now.
Just a moment. Bianca took a deep breath, and he could almost hear an audible click as she got a grip on herself. Just who the hell are you? She demanded. And what are you doing inside my statue? The dragon shrugged with all four shoulders.
What you're basically asking is, am I bespoke or off the peg? Answer is that I'm not quite sure.
Bianca just looked blank. The dragon marshalled vocabulary.
In other words, he said, am I some sort of wandering spirit who's kibitzing in your statue just because it was the first vacant lot I came to? Or is there some sort of grand design going on here? As to that,
he lied,
your guess is as good as mine. Facts, I was a disembodied dragon, and now I'm embodied. Very nicely, too, though if I do have one tiny criticism, it's that you were just a fraction over-ambitious with the wingspan. If you'd done your equations a tad more carefully, you'd cut the overall area back by about 30 square inches. In fact, you might well be able to sort that out for me when you've next got a minute.
Quite, Bianca replied grimly. Or I might just take a bloody great big sledgehammer and turn you into a skip full of gravel. You were going to blow on me.
True, the dragon nodded. But be fair, you started it, hitting me over the head like that. You may not know this, but I have a very bad race memories about being hit by humans. The fact that you're standing there not slipping nicely down my great intestine ought to suggest to you that I'm prepared to be civilized about all of this. It would be nice if you were the same.
Of all the... That click again, as Bianca guillotined the sentence.
Oh,
muttered the dragon to himself.
Like a girl with spirit, methylated for choice, but a simple ethane marinade will do.
I've just, she went on, been talking to St. George. Ring any bells?
You've been talking to the saints, huh? If they urge you to drive the English out of Aquitaine, watch your step. Young girls can come to harm that way.
My statue, Bianca replied, called as a holiday in Wales, of St. George, your other half. The dragon shuddered.
I'd find another way of putting that if I were you.
Your better half, then. The dragon growled, revealing a row of huge, sharp teeth that Bianca hadn't had anything to do with.
Let me just give you a word of advice,
he said.
When making jokes to dragons, why did the chicken cross the road is fairly safe. Likewise, when there's a door, not a door. Beyond that, tread very carefully, okay?
Dragon, Bianca said, am I going mad?
Why ask me? I am not a doctor. You seem reasonably well balanced to me, except for your habit of bashing people when they're trying to get some sleep. But I put that down to some repressed childhood trauma or other.
Bianca looked thoughtful. You see, she went on, this makes 2 statues I've had conversations with in 24 hours, and before that I honestly thought that huge slabs of masonry under my direct control were playing musical plinths while my back was turned. It made me feel a whole lot better if I knew it was only me going balmy and not the universe. The dragon considered the point for a moment.
What we need,
he said,
is an objective test. You know, see if anybody else can hear me. That sort of thing.
Bianca shook her head. Not necessarily, she replied. I could easily be imagining that too.
Picky cow, aren't you? How do you know that a non-speaking statue and immobile monuments aren't just a figment of your diseased brain? Maybe you just kid yourself that nobody else can hear us either. Come on, we could play this game for hours.
Bianca shook her head to see if that would clear it. The conversation was getting a bit too similar to the sort of thing you overhear in pubs frequented by first-year students around 10:30 at night. Your other, St. George, told me a story all about a place called Albion that was full of dragons and people on horses killing them all off. Does that make any sense to you? The dragon laughed.
No,
he said.
Didn't make any sense at the time either, but yes. The story is true.
He sighed and looked around.
You want to hear it?
Bianca nodded.
Fair enough.
He shook himself and stepped out of the statue, a dark, thick-set, bearded man in his late 20s, fairly commonplace and unremarkable except for his crocodile shoes and longer-than-average fingernails.
Buy me a drink and I'll tell you all about it.
Father Priscian Kelly was just about to lock up and go home when the west door opened and a man shuffled in, looked around for the confessionals and plonked himself down in one.
A customer,
sighed Father Kelly.
Just when I thought I'd be home in time for the bill. Nevertheless, work's work.
He kitted himself out, drew the curtain and slid back the hatch. Silence.
I don't want to hurry you, son,
he said, but a fist, large as a grapefruit and very hairy, punched through the wire grill and entwined its fingers in the vestments nearest Father Kelly's throat.
"Listen, mate,"
growled a voice.
"you gotta help me, capiche?" "Son, don't you flaming well son me,"
the voice interrupted,
"or I'll have you court-martialed for giving lip to a superior officer. Know who I am."
Father Kelly admitted his ignorance. At once the confessional began to glow with a deep amber light.
"God, no," George replied, but getting warmer. The fluorescent bubble hat's supposed to be a hint.
Nearly blinded by the radiance of the halo, Father Kelly turned his head away until the pressure of the twisted cloth at his throat checked him.
"You're a saint," he gasped, "a real saint. Here in my shut your row," replied George. "Now, listen, I need a place to hide out for a few days, some grub and a few bits of kit. Plus, you keep absolutely stum, not a word to anybody. You got that?"
Father Kelly nodded.
"And money," George added, "and later on, maybe a false passport and a good plastic surgeon, okay?" "I will be. What for exactly?"
"What for?" George exploded.
"What for? You questioning a direct order, sunshine? Well—"
Father Kelly tried to shake his head, but there wasn't enough room in his collar.
"No, not at all, your grace," he sputtered. "Just seemed a little bit. You—"
George snarled, tightening his grip.
"Can keep your bloody stupid opinions to yourself. Got it? Never had the like in all me born days. I mean, when the big fella said, 'Let there be light,' he didn't let pillocks like you asking him what he wanted it for. Now stop prattling around and get on with it, or you're going to spend the next 1,000 years whitewashing stars. Do I make myself clear?"
Father Kelly nodded, and the hand released him. The halo, too, went out.
"Wait there,"
snarled the voice, and as the priest flopped back against the confessional wall, George slipped out, looked carefully up and down the nave, and opened the main door, just a little crack.
"All clear," he said. "Come on, move it. Nobody been around asking questions, I suppose."
Father Kelly tried to remember. There had been young Darren Flynn who'd popped in with a query about the doctrine of transubstantiation, but he guessed the saint didn't mean that sort of thing.
"Not as I recall," he replied. "Nobody hanging round, casing the gaff. Big green bastards, scales with wings and a tail." "I don't think so." "That's all right then. Now then, we're out of here."
An hour or so later, back at the priest's lodgings, when the distinguished visitor had finished off the last of the stout and the whisky and sunk into a noisy sleep in the armchair, Father Kelly sat in profound thought, studying the list of requirements the guests had dictated earlier. Now, most of them, Father Kelly acknowledged, wouldn't be a problem, and, as the Monsignor had quite rightly pointed out, what he wanted with them was nobody's business but his own. True also that as a priest he was duty-bound to assist a superior officer to the full extent of his abilities and resources. That said, however, where on earth was he going to lay his hands on 15 kilos of cyanide and a rapier surface-to-air missile? That was Chapter 4 of Paint Your Dragon by the amazing Mr. Thomas of Holt, and Chapter 5 will come up in a couple of days. So please leave a comment, let me know what you're thinking, let me know how you're doing, what you're going on with. We're only on Tuesday, so it's hopefully going to be Thursday for the next one. But if I can get another one done sooner, I certainly will do for you. I've got to get my inspiration back for my songs because I had a bit of a time off, so we need to think about which songs what we're going to do, which theme tunes. There's so many out there that are so funny. Oh, la-da-da-da-da. So stay safe, keep hydrated. Let me know how you're getting on, and I'll keep repeating myself. If you can do the like button, that'll be absolutely outstanding, because we've got to keep them little hamsters fluffy and glowing, haven't we? And I really do have my eye on an alpaca. I think they're adorable creatures. Sloths too. Anyway, sorry for repeating myself, but please take it easy, stay safe, stay hydrated, keep warm, keep cool, keep any way that makes you happy. And I'll see you in a couple of days. Take it easy, pedal. Stay safe.